Hey there, and welcome to today's episode of the Vineyard Underground podcast. This is your host and viticulturist, Fritz Westover. And you might remember a few episodes ago, that was episode number 42, I did a grower Q&A episode with my friend and colleague, Jim Duane from the Inside Winemaking podcast. And we had so many questions, and I'm going to say so much fun, that Jim is back today here on the Vineyard Underground for round 2 of answering grape grower questions. And these are questions from the field, from his audience, my audience, and general podcast listeners. So if you're listening out there, remember, your question might be here in the firing squad someday coming up. So let me start with introducing Jim. Hey, Jim, how's it going? Thanks for being back.
Ritz, so great to be here. Thank you. I'm excited to do this on round 2.
Yeah, let's do round 2. If you liked round 1, we've got completely different questions coming into this one. But before we jump into our Q&A episode here, remember, you can go back and listen to the last one on episode number 42, and you can hear a pretty comprehensive introduction for you, Jim. But why don't you just tell the listener here quickly about yourself, what you're doing these days, and a little bit about your podcast too.
You bet. Thanks, Fritz. So I'm a winemaker. I live and work in Napa Valley, and I make wine at a very small family-run winery in Napa Valley. And I run a podcast because I have some sort of flexibility and time to do that. So the podcast is called Inside Winemaking. 2024 is going to be year 10 for the podcast. And it's kind of similar to what you do. I do a lot of interview podcasts and kind of use this platform as a way to network and talk to experts, like yourself, viticulturists, winemakers, other people in the wine trade. So yeah, that's kind of it. And the question is, on the shoots that will be next year's canes, is it best to drop fruit or carry fruit on those specific shoots?
Okay, good question. For those out there who are cane pruning, traditionally when cane pruning, whether it's a bilateral or unilateral, there's typically a renewal spur that's left. And that renewal spur is 2-budded typically, and it grows 2 shoots. And then one of those is generally used as a fruiting cane, and the other one is trimmed back to another renewal spur. But there are some growers who want to have less cuts on their vines, or there could be multiple reasons, maybe less entry for wood disease. So they don't want as many renewal spurs or any at all. So basically you're laying a fruiting cane down, and then you're hoping that a shoot near the base of that cane is going to push strong. And then you'll be able to use one of those as your renewal cane for the next year, or I should say, as your fruiting cane for the next year. So, hopefully you don't get a late spring freeze, because that could really wreak havoc. But luckily, those buds out on the end of the cane, right, Jim, the apical dominants, they're coming out first.
Mm-hmm.
You could really be in trouble if that apical dominance suppresses those basal buds. And, what you end up doing is if you have to go farther and farther up the cane each year to find a good, fruiting cane, you're going to get
then you're going bigger and bigger.
Yeah, you're going to get this creep, and that's okay a little bit. We expect a little creep each year, even with spur pruning, but you don't want to jump, 5 to 10 centimeters a year or 2 to 3 inches a year. So to answer the question here, I would say I always like to wait and see how the shoots are performing.
What is the most effective way to address powdery mildew in the vineyard? It's a big one. And then, will compost tea work as a mildew spray? And if so, any tricks or tips for success? So let's start with most effective way to address powdery mildew in a vineyard.
Yeah. No, I like how you get excited about mildew questions, because my master's degree is in plant pathology. And so I always get excited about pathogens, but my growers just don't. I don't get it. They see it. But no, all joking aside, I don't want to see any disease in my growers' vineyards. In fact, as the time of recording this podcast, we're doing a 3-day intensive course within Virtual Viticulture Academy on disease management. And one of the things that I've been really emphasizing for disease control, we'll steer this towards powdery mildew now, because that's the question in hand, is the critical time for disease management for almost all the fungal diseases that affect fruit is going to be between 2 weeks before bloom to about 6 weeks after fruit set. That's pretty much an 8-week long period. So if you can keep the mildew off of your fruit, which is the most important thing, then you really need to make sure you're using your best products, maybe your tightest intervals, and you're doing your best weather monitoring during that phenological time frame. So that's 8-week period before bloom to 6 week, 2 weeks before bloom to 6 weeks after fruit set. So if you're, spraying sulfur or oils, never together, of course, if you're using one of those approaches early in the season, that's great. Your pressure is usually a little lower early in the season, but once you get to that larger canopy size, temperatures start to warm up. Maybe you have early morning fog or mildew, or dew, not mildew, morning dew, moisture in general. That's all you need for powdery mildew to get started. You don't need rainfall. You just need humidity to be high enough.
How different are the pest pressures in these alternative regions? Any significantly any significant pests that don't impact California but impact other US regions, or are the common pests in California that growers elsewhere don't have to worry about? For example, I can't say I've heard of Japanese beetles mentioned once while in Napa, but they can absolutely devastate grape foliage in the Midwest. Fritz, I think you're the best person in the country to answer this question because I've got it easy out here in California.
Yeah, we don't like to say like growing grapes is easy in California, but when you start comparing it to,
Yeah.
I don't know, North and South Carolina or Maine or Minnesota or Michigan, anywhere almost where we have higher disease pressure and insect pressure, yeah, it's a little easier. In California, that would be, or in a dry climate. So basically, take any fungal disease you have in California and any insect pressure, and just times it by 10 or more, and that's what everyone else is dealing with. So then the other bad problem is we have invasive species. So you ask what's different? Well, at first it was spotted winged Drosophila, it's a fruit fly that's got little spots on the wings on the tips there. And this fruit fly, instead of just coming in and laying eggs on a berry that's broken or split, they actually puncture into a intact berry and lay their eggs inside the berry. So then you get the harvest, and you're like, why are there gnat larvae or fly larvae in my fermentation? Well, they didn't get in from spoiled fruit. They got into the fruit because they were implanted into the fruit. And this is a problem for blueberry growers and all kinds of fruit growers. So finally, we have methods of control with short pre-harvest intervals of, both low and broad impact products that are used to control the spotted wing Drosophila. And California, for example, is very good at keeping some of these invasive species out through their very strict border protocols, and which we won't get into here. But the other big one now that is really a thorn in my side as I'm working with more and more growers across the country is the spotted lanternfly. And the spotted lanternfly it can move on, its eggs can move on a warehouse pallet. So put your imagination to use there. It doesn't really survive in really cold regions, but the whole southeastern United States is subject to the spread of this insect pest. And what it does is it comes in and it smothers. They're kind of large, like maybe the size of my thumbnail, and they're beautiful looking. If you want to look up spotted lanternfly, they look really pretty, but they will completely cover your cordons and trunks when they get into vineyards. They really like the tree of heaven. They'll cover this tree up. You don't see the wood anymore. It's disgusting. They cover the entire plant, and they feed off of the the phloem tissue. And if enough of them get on there, they can cause death. And they have killed vineyards in Pennsylvania, and they've been found in other eastern states. And we don't have them down in the South here yet, but I'm afraid it's a matter of time because of how they travel. So, thank goodness we have Penn State University, Cornell, other universities who are doing the work to find out the life cycle, the best timing of control, how to control through the environment and getting rid of host plants and tree of heaven. What can we do? But I guess the point is we have Japanese beetles. We have all these things that you don't deal with in maybe California. Plus, we have all those things like thrips and mealy bugs and army worms and all those other things you do have. So yes, pick which challenges you want to deal with. And when you're choosing, going back to that question, where should we find unique new areas to grow grapes? Well, find the ones that hopefully have less disease pressure and pest pressure, and also grow the grape varieties that are going to succeed the best there too. That's all
It's
I
a big
have.
challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, real challenges there. So, and it's dynamic and evolving. I mean, these pests move, they're invasive, they come from other countries, or they build up populations, they evolve. So it's you're never going to fully get a handle on all the pests.